So yeah, I won't get an introduction, which is fine, right? Sometimes I can get a little tedious, so I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jeffrey Tucker, and I'm the editorial director of the American Institute for Economic Research in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which sits on 100 acres, and there's a big, very physical world castle. You know, it's the funniest thing. I've always been this like Jetsons guy, believe in digital everything and the migration of the physical world to the cloud. I wrote a book called The Jetsons World. I've been celebrating the rise of digital media since 1995 and just getting rid of all physical property, you know, as long as I can remember, you know, throughout all my books and, you know, actually throughout everything. And then I got this primo job that I've dreamed out all my life. As editorial director of this institution founded in 1933. I tell you, it's the funniest thing, because when I was first driven up there, you know, it's this long winding road in the Berkshires. Do you know about the Berkshires? It's western Massachusetts. It's sort of I don't know, it's where people, it's like the last stage of success in life or something. You would move to the Berkshires, you know. It's like after you get tired of Wall Street, or I don't know what happened. I don't know what the whole place is strange. A bunch of communists live there, actually. Very wealthy communists. But anyway, so we have this estate, and there's this 30-room mansion made out of, I don't know, stones from God knows where. And these rolling hills, and out the ballroom in the back, you can see 3 states, and it was the hardest thing in the world for me to adjust to this reality. I thought, wait, this is not just normal physical life. I mean, this is not just analog here, right? This is so thrown back, I can't even believe it. So it took me a while to kind of adjust to my new life there, but it's kind of awesome because it was founded in 1933, specifically in opposition to FDR's confiscation of gold, actually. And I want to talk about that today, just so we can go back in history and understand the difficulties of the past and the reason why we found so many solutions for the future. But the house itself was built in 1907 by Mr. and Mrs. G.R. Pearson, who was an engineer and a very sort of wealthy Wall Street guy. And he and his wife were 2 of 25 Americans who sailed on the Lusitania. Do you know that name of that boat? An English ship that was sunk by a German submarine, and that was what kicked into action basically U.S. entry into World War I. And Mr. and Mrs. Pearson were on that boat, incredibly. And so that created problems for the estate, and so it went to another owner, and then it went to another owner, and finally, now it's there. And I'm enjoying the place like immensely, partially because I don't own it, actually. Right? It's like it's really nice to live in a castle when you don't actually not responsible for any aspect of its upkeep. I mean, there's the staff and everything, so I don't have to do anything. And incredibly, and I'm very grateful for this, Mr. and Mrs. Pearson still live there, actually. And he's always, and nobody ever sees her, but people see him oftentimes. He shows up in a top hat and white gloves in the living room and so on. And I tell all of our interns all about him, and it creeps them out just like, you can't believe it. Like there's nothing creepier to the young generation than ghost stories, especially when you tell them very seriously. So it's very nice. Anyway, it's my new gig, and I'm very happy with it. I'm also very grateful that this institution is open to discussing blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency technology, because you wouldn't expect that from such a stodgy old institution dedicated to economic research. Because, I mean, truth is, right now, we still live in times of profound incredulity towards crypto. I mean, you know this, right? I mean, like, your friends think you're crazy for being here. It's one of the reasons we come to these conferences, is to get affirmed in the sense that we're not insane, actually. Right? We hang around people that understand. And it's been lovely to be at this event and be around so many people who get it. And I must say, I'm really deeply honored that I've been entrusted with the spot of giving this talk here. So thank you, Michael. I appreciate it very much. I'm also the founder of the Atlanta Bitcoin Embassy here in ATL, and I'm really thrilled with this institution. People are always asking, well, you know, are you an incubator? No. You know, what product are you selling? Well, we don't have a product we're selling. We're more of a social community and a place for reading groups and social hangouts and co-working spaces for people working in the blockchain industry. But I think the number one contribution this thing makes is bringing people together who otherwise would never know each other through a technological solution to a very profound problem, which we have which is financial exclusion. It's a matter of building the future together as a human community. And to me, that is magical in times of great and profound political division. You know, I'm something of an economic historian. I look back at the sweep of history and I see nothing but terrible divisions caused by nationalized money and nationalized, centralized solutions. And I'm just so enraptured with the ways that the discovery and the coming together of blockchain technology, first in Bitcoin and now with this really global revolution that's taking place. I really believe that through this technology, we're going to solve many of the problems that people have been trying to solve for 6,000 years that have eluded elites and leaders and authoritarian systems of government. And more than that, I'm most impressed that it's happening without anyone's real permission. It's really been an extraordinary grassroots movement that began in 2008 and has really taken shape despite all the objections of all of the elites. I do lots of interviews, probably as some of you in this room do, on this topic. And you've probably noticed the way things go in our space. It's very strange to me, because I've been involved basically as I guess you could say, an investor or had skin in the game since about early 2013, but I've been following the whole thing since about 2009 very closely, hoping it would work, but not really believing it would, and finally coming around in early 2013. And I've seen, you know, the price as something like a test of its viability. I mean, I never personally believed Bitcoin would ever obtain a value equal to the world's most valuable currency, which is the dollar, which is the price of $1. I never believed that could happen. And once it did happen, I realized there was a proof of concept had taken place. So when it got to $30 and people were screaming at me that it was a bubble and that it was going to collapse, you know, I didn't rule out that possibility. I think it possibly was a bubble and it probably could collapse, you know. But nonetheless, I knew that something extraordinary had happened. In the meantime, of course, there are ebbs and flows in the hysteria that affect our space. How many of you were at North American Bitcoin Conference in, what was it, it was in November 2017, right? Complete madhouse. It was better this year, I can tell you, right? Far smaller crowd, but much more substance going on. And in fact, I would say that about most conferences I've attended in 2018, they've just been overall better experiences. And I hear that from a lot of people in our space. When the hysteria dies down, that's when we get really serious and things get really wonderful. I think we're probably headed to another period of hysteria, and it's going to be good to remember these days. And remember 2017 so that we don't partake in it. It frustrates me because, you know, crypto is behaving the way conventional stock or something like that would in terms of public culture. When it's going up, everybody's all excited, everybody's thrilled. When it's going down, people are depressed and and whatever. But it's never really, people are not really thinking about the underlying meaning of what's taking place in our times. It's always about the direction of the price. And you know, if you're like, I've been involved for so long that I'm absolutely astonished at the current price of Bitcoin and the market cap of cryptos in general. By the way, just to put my cards on the table, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm not that guy. I'm a competition maximalist. I believe in experimentation, and I also love the talk that was given here earlier today, Failing Forward. I don't know if you heard that beautiful talk, but it was just a long litany of disasters in our space. I mean, I love that. I could listen to that all day. I mean, I believe in failure. I think it's a very beautiful thing. That's how we learn. That's how we improve. That's how we get better as a community and as a society, is through the opportunity to fail. But I get always astonished because people call me up and they're always like, so what do you have to say for yourself now that the price has fallen? Like, I don't know. I'm astounded. I mean, it would have to fall to 30 cents for me to start to get worried, actually. I mean, slice off 2 zeros and I'll start getting concerned, but not till then. It's just ridiculous. So what is it that excites me so much about this technology? It's accessibility, it's democratic drive, it's bottom up introduction into the world, and the way it's continuing to be built out based on a decentralized programmers and enthusiasts and social media all over the world. What excites me most about it is that I never believed it could ever happen. And my incredulity towards this technology was something that had captivated me from the earliest dawn of my intellectual consciousness. And I want to kind of explain what I mean by this with a couple of stories. So I fell in love with economics as a discipline at the age of about 19, and was enraptured with the modeling and the math and the promise that would explain something to me that I couldn't otherwise understand, which is something like why certain human communities thrive in wealth and health and long lives and happiness and productivity and access and communication, access to food and all the beautiful material things that we love, and others die and fall apart, and lifespans decrease, and food supply goes away, and terrible things start happening, like people start eating each other and dictators come to power. Like, I didn't understand what it was that made the difference between those two scenarios, and I wanted to find it out. So I studied economics for that reason. And I liked it. It was really interesting. And I was probably 3 semesters deep in studying with regular economics as it existed in something like 85 or 86 or something like that, which was thoroughly Keynesian at the time. It's improved since then. And something was missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And my roommate had a book, and it was about the history of Weimar Germany and the great inflation that took place from 1921 to 1923 in that country. And it was really the first book of economic history I had ever read, and the first book that really connected economic logic to the reality of human life in any kind of tangible, meaningful way. I mean, it's amazing that you can study economics all the way through a PhD level and never actually encounter human beings in any aspect of your study. It's actually true, even today. In fact, you can pick up the latest copy of the American Economic Review, and there's not a single human being in it. You know, there's not a single story. There's not a single mention of normal human life at all. You know, economics has been re-rendered as a different kind of discipline. It's mechanics or it's engineering or something like that. It's just pure machinery. It's not real life. So this book just enraptured me, and I couldn't believe it. And what was fascinating to me about this story was how do I put it? How inadvertent it was. Now, just to kind of review, Germany had been involved in World War I, fighting this monstrous war, and lost. And went through a very rough peace with Versailles, where they had immense amounts of debts that they couldn't pay. And oftentimes when countries get stretched too thin, they turn to the printing presses, thinking that they can control the results. And that was really true in Germany. The experts were in charge in Weimar Germany. There wasn't anybody who set out to destroy the currency. It didn't happen like that. It was actually inadvertent. It was a desire to pay the debts and get the West off their back, get the victors in the war from bothering them and dinging them with phone calls and letters, pay your bills, pay your bills. They said, okay, finally, okay, we can do that. Everything seemed to be fine until one day it wasn't. And the not fine got ugly really fast. The economy began to grow very quickly, as happens when you start printing money. And people started working very long hours to learn extra money because it seemed to be all over the place. Jobs were abundant. And then practically overnight, the purchasing power of the Reichsmark began to decline. And so you had to work harder for the same amount of money. And the prices went up, and they went up, and they went up. And over the course of 6 months, 8 months, a year, we went from basically a stable currency to something like 10,000, 50,000, 100,000% inflation, and the entire currency was destroyed. To the point that it's a little bit like in Venezuela now. Have you seen these pictures online? It's like, this is how many of Venezuelan notes it takes to buy some toilet paper. The toilet paper's this big and the notes are this tall, you know? This is what happens on hyperinflation. This is what happened in Weimar Germany, a once civilized country. I mean, the home of Beethoven and Brahms and Goethe, the height of civilization had descended into utter barbarism in just the course of something like 2 years because they got the money wrong. And getting the money wrong is never limited to just this thing we called economics or finance. It affects your perception of everything. When the money fails, there's a widespread perception that everything in life is failing. Your religion, your family, everything you depended on, your job, the meaning of your life, your outlook on progress for the future. It's like somebody just comes and tears the floor out from under you and you're falling. And you're very inclined to believe just about anything. And I think it's correct. Historians are correct about this, that the failure of the Reichsmark and the inflation of Germany led to the rise of Hitler, but in the following way. It takes through a series of steps. What is your life worth? What are you going to do with your time on this planet? Where are you going to find true meaning? Look at all the things that have failed you. The churches are corrupt. The government is corrupt. Germany lost the war. Our leaders are corrupt. And now look, the very thing that is the sign and symbol of your success in life, the money you make that enables you to buy things and obtain things for yourself and your family to live a better life, that has failed. and everything associated with commercial life that they told you. Who are they? Who are they? The bankers, the usurers, the captains of finance. Everything they said was going to save you has doomed you. They are liars. So what are you going to believe in? What are you going to believe in the future? What really matters? What are you going to default to? You've got to find meaning somewhere. And the National Socialist Workers' Party, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, had an answer. They said, it was your blood. That's what ultimately means something. It's your identity. It's your Germanness. That's what we've lost track of because of, look at all this mass immigration and confusion about who's who. For God's sake, we've got Jews living in this place. What are they doing here? And so on. So it was the failure of the money that led people to be open to these kinds of ideas. Totalitarian, terrifying ideas that put race ahead of human connection, put tribe ahead of fundamental conditions like human rights, dignity, the aspiration to get along with other people. And at that very moment, the political philosophers got involved. And they said, yeah, we've got an idea. The money has failed, it's true. Blood and race matter, it does. But how do you make that meaningful? You make that meaningful through a struggle, through a war, through a conflict, through sacrifice of your own life, through, ultimately, war. There's where you're going to find your meaning. It's extraordinary. I mean, once you start taking it apart and you see it step by step, you can see the philosophical trajectory it took. A once normal country became an industrial killing field that spread genocide all over the once civilized Europe. And what kicked it off? Bad money, unsound money, centralized monetary policy, rule by experts, people who thought they had the whole system under control until one day they didn't. So I put down that book, and I remembered why it is that I had fallen in love with economics, because it explains what it is we need to know. What are the institutions that give rise to prosperity? What are the institutions that kill the human spirit and unleash the worst within us and spread the terrors of hell throughout the world, leading to genocide? This is what we're talking about. These are the stakes. And I knew it at that moment. And so I fell in love with monetary theory. And the more I looked at it, the more it seemed to explain so much. And I get why so many people are not interested in this topic. It seems a little too removed. Wait, we've got to have sound money, or else everything you love in life is at risk. Well, I don't really get that. When you start to explain, it takes too long. Have you ever taken over Thanksgiving dinner party with monetary talks, you know? Let me tell you about Bitcoin. Oh, God, here it goes again. Right. But it's important. Not everybody understands it, but all of us are called to explain it, to understand it and explain it. So I decided to pursue this question of how are we going to fix the money so something like that doesn't ever happen again. And I went through the dominant part of my career not seeing the answer because of this fateful decision that had been made about 100 years ago in the West to centralize money, to create central banks, and to put the experts in charge. And it was a remarkable decision because it's hard to unravel. Like, once that happens, how do you fix it? We're not talking about, you know, a small experiment. It was a complete centralization and nationalization of money that happened in Russia, and it happened in the US, and it happened in Germany about 10 years earlier, and it happened in England about 10 years before it happened in the US. But by 1913 or something like that, every developed economy had a central bank and a nationalized money where a handful of elites decided, we know what money is and what it does, we will control it. And through that, through our control, and God bless them, they had the best intentions, we'll eliminate business cycles, we'll eliminate inflation, we'll get rid of banking panics and wildcat banks and keep your money safe. Just trust us. Just trust us. We're the best at this. Don't trust all these other people with their weird private monies. We're in charge. So what is the very first big project that was engaged in after the age of central banking was kicked off? It's a thing called the Great War. It wasn't called World War I then because they didn't know there was going to be a II, so they called it the Great War. That's what they did with their beloved money monopoly. So let's just take a tour around the world and march forward through the history. Let's look first at Russia. Ah, what a beautiful war. The Tsar and his power and his majesty. Look at the prosperity, and it was prosperous. Russia was a very prosperous country. Many people considered it to be the farther outpost of the West, actually. You look at pictures of the Tsar, they all look like French aristocrats, you know? It's a very prosperous country. The war seemed very delightful, a chance for Russia to throw its weight around Europe. The problem is that every war needs to be paid for somehow. And the Tsar, as every government ultimately does, turned to the printing presses, and the inflation got bad, and it got worse, and even worse, and even worse, and it got into the double digits, and you know, you can look at the estimates, but it could have been 100, 200%, but basically people saw their standard of living being collapsed. At the same time, their sons were being drafted to be killed in foreign wars, and guess what happened? People lost faith in the system and started looking for something else. The Bolshevik Revolution was the next step. It was as inevitable as the rise of Hitler after Weimar. The Bolsheviks took over. Actually, there was a revolution. Eventually, the Bolsheviks took over. It took about a year to solidify the rule, and that led to 70 years of totalitarian rule, all beginning with the failure of the money. If the money had been sound, the history of this century would have looked very different. Meanwhile, governments in the West also inflated. The US less so than Germany, but in Germany also inflated. And almost all the allied and enemy powers used the printing press to make this thing. It was kind of the end of civilization, actually, as we knew it. We had come up with it, bumped up at the end of the 19th century and found the whole magic key to making the world beautiful. It comes through property rights, free enterprise, innovation, diplomacy leading to peace. We threw it all away. We did this because we now had the power to print money. Monopoly privileges granted to the government. Then it got worse. I've already talked about the history of Weimar. Terrible history. But US, we had our own problems. We had our own problems. We had our own war debts to pay, and sponsored a kind of a generous, loose money policy in the late 1920s that led to a stock market boom that very quickly, actually, there were two. First one took place in 1921 to 23. We had a boom and bust cycle, but the funny thing is, who was president then? Was it Coolidge? Yeah, or was it Harding? I think it's Coolidge. Anyway, the attitude then was something like, nah, recessions, they come and go, forget it. Sure enough, that's what happened. 18 months later, the economy was back on track again. But the inflation began again. Stock market of 1929 hit. It was an incredible calamity. We can't even imagine what it was like. I mean, between 1929 and 1934, the GDP collapsed 60%. Like, we can't even imagine. You thought 2008 was bad? Like, you can't even conceive of it. Half of the working population, the population that was working in 1929, by 1934 had been fired from their jobs. So there's something like, which is a lot, it was like 15 million unemployed people. Durable goods orders collapsed 80%. I mean, this was an unbelievable disaster. FDR campaigned on a platform of, actually, it's interesting when you think about what were the big political issues at the time. Yes, solving the Great Depression, that was a big problem, but another big problem is that you couldn't get a drink in this country. Somebody, actually, a lot of people had the idea that the real problem with this country is that there's too much alcohol, too much liquor, and so we had to ban it. And the only way you could really do anything as an American was to add a constitutional amendment. So there's a constitutional amendment banning the production and consumption of alcohol. And if you ever think that this is a normal country, just remember that that happened right here in the USA, all right? This is an insane place. We do crazy things, right? That was insane. So in the election of 1932, prohibition was a big, big issue, arguably a bigger issue than the Great Depression itself. People wanted beer. FDR promised to repeal prohibition, and Hoover had basically, as a Republican, had decided that he would lean in on the prohibition side of things. So of course he lost miserably. FDR also campaigned for balancing budgets and keeping us out of war. So, political mendacity that goes way back. But he took office in April of 1933, because the calendar was slightly different back then in terms of the inauguration and everything. He got some very bad advice. They said, his advisor told him, these people had never studied monetary theory or history or anything else, but they had the power, that's the point. They controlled the system, so you can do whatever you want. If you're in control, you can do whatever you want. So they decided to have some fun. First, they closed the banks. Now, there were a lot of bank closings taking place all across the country at this time, so it wasn't entirely unusual, but to do it on a national level was rather alarming. Your money's in the bank, and one day it's just closed, and they closed them for a week or two. Close the banks. You can't get you the money. Oh, it's for your own good. It's for your own good. The nation needs your money, not you. The nation needs your money. Shut the banks. When they reopened, it came with a sign posted on every public building in the United States. If you own gold, you have to turn it in. Who owned gold? Everyone. I mean, we were under the gold standard. Everybody had gold. I mean, the promise was, and you can read the bills back then, the dollars were promises to pay in gold. And there was routine that people would take their money in and check on this. When there was a bank run, people would pull their gold out and they'd keep gold. If they felt, the demand for money went up, people would convert their gold to dollars. And if it went down, they would do the reverse. It was a promise that the government had given to the public. FDR just one day decided to change that promise and said it's no longer legal for you to own gold, which everybody assumed to be money. So now you were being forced to use not money, but money substitutes that were given by the Fed. So you had to turn in your gold. A few days later, and by the way, there were criminal penalties, right? Like jail time, and many, many people went to jail because he had blamed, FDR had blamed the Great Depression on the hodlers. It's true, yeah. The hodlers were keeping gold back from the public, and so we couldn't restart the economy because there's too many people just keeping gold at their houses. So we're going to get that gold. So they got the gold. They got a lot of the gold, not all the gold. They eventually got I don't know how much they eventually got, but criminal penalties, a lot of people went to jail. And then, with the stroke of a pen, FDR changed the definition of the dollar. It used to be 1/20th of an ounce of gold. Now, through pure executive fiat, changed the definition to 1/35th an ounce of gold. So just robbed basically every dollar holder in the country. Now what about gold clause contracts, public and private? What are you going to do about that? By the end of the year, they figured that out. You know what they did? They reneged on all of them. They said they're no longer valid. That's it. Executive order. These contracts are no longer valid. Just like a banana republic, third world country, right? Just the contracts are no. The US government in 1933 literally defaulted on all the terms of its own debt. An incredible thing. The first book retelling this history came out last year. That's how little known this history is, right? It's like weirdly suppressed, you know? Just like people don't talk about it. But that's the kind of things that happens with a centralized monetary system. It's the kind of things that they do to you when you trust the center to control your money. Well, let's just march forward slightly to the end of World War II with the rise of Keynesian macroeconomic planning. The Depression had ended. By the way, don't let anybody tell you that FDR ended the Great Depression. He didn't. It continued all the way up to the war and through the war. And I don't even know what it means when you have, I mean, you can't really measure economic output in the middle of a war where every man between the age of 18 and 35 or somebody was drafted to kill and be killed, and everybody's eating rationed groceries, and every industry is nationalized. The data don't mean anything under those conditions. But what happened was that after World War II ended, it turned out that the hodlers saved the country, right? Everybody got extremely risk averse. The velocity of money had collapsed over the last previous 15 years, where people were just storing and saving their own money in their mattresses, in their private accounts, and saving like crazy. That new capital was unleashed on the world after the end of the war in 1948. Coincidentally, the Cold War started then too. These people just, they can't leave us alone. They don't believe in normalcy, right? You can't just say, well, you know, gosh, seems like the old problem's gone, so let's not have any new ones. No, they always have to find a new one. It's always something new. So in 1948, it was the Cold War. But nonetheless, we got a beautiful economic recovery, and then we got a new generation of leaders that thought they knew how to manage the economy well by centralized direction of money and credit. And gradually, of course, and also in 1948, we got us a new monetary system. It was called the Bretton Woods system. The entire world would now newly be on a gold standard, but it would be a global gold standard only pertaining to nations. But within nations themselves, it would be purely fiat system. And then every country in the world would hold dollars, which in turn would be based on gold. So, but you couldn't actually, you couldn't actually get gold. It was, in fact, it was still illegal to own gold all the way until 1973, I believe, 1974, maybe 75, it was finally really legalized. Nonetheless, they called it a gold standard, but it's a fake gold standard. That led to certain fiscal instabilities, because if you're going to have a single monetary policy for the entire world, you also have to have a single fiscal policy for the entire world. You can't have some governments running high deficits and others balancing their budgets, because that's going to lead to outflows and inflows of gold that are disproportionate to the debt that's backing them. So, or to the reverse, the debt that is unbacked by gold. So you're going to have too many outflows of gold. The system can't survive. The whole world economy came under very similar pressures in the 1960s that you're now seeing in Europe today. Single monetary policy, but disparate fiscal policies. It actually is unstable, and it can't work over the long term. So the system came under pressure, and it eventually collapsed. In 1973, same time gold was re-legalized, Richard Nixon announced to the world that we have a better system now than ever before. It's so glorious. It's so great. We're finally completely off the gold standard, and now the experts will finally give us what we've always wanted, which is a stable dollar and beautiful exchange rates and peace and prosperity for everybody. The greatest system in history. And even very smart people like Milton Friedman thought it could work, because he thought that the Federal Reserve would adhere to a quantity standard. You know, we're only going to inflate 2 or 3% per year, same as the GDP, and it'll just be magically calibrated, you know? This is what happens when you put really smart people in charge of the system. They're going to make the machinery run perfectly. Well, you know what? It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And by the late 1970s, we saw our own version of hyperinflation. So interest rates hitting double digits as high as 23%, and inflation at 13%, which had been a complete shock for the generation raised after World War II, because nobody actually expected the money to decline in value that rapidly, that quickly. And the savings of the American people is literally gutted. 6 years later, by 1985, most American families could not live on a single income anymore. They had to put spouses to work just to sustain the income. And people credit women's rights, which I don't want to take any credit away from the women's rights movement. It's just great. But actually, it was a kind of a draft, you know. So suddenly, every household had to have 2 incomes just to sustain the same level of prosperity they had taken for granted earlier, 10 years. That led to a gigantic and very important cultural upheaval in this country that I think we haven't come to terms with yet. All because the money was not sound. But by this time, people began to really wonder, what are we going to do? How are we going to get a gold standard? How are we going to get sound money back? And that is really a profoundly important point. Here's the problem. When the people who are in charge of making the reform own the entire system that they're reforming and also benefit from it as it is, they have no reason to reform it. You know, you can make the best case in the world for a gold standard, a restoration of the gold standard, a decentralization of money, but so long as the implementation of that system relies on the discretion of the Federal Reserve and the Department of Treasury and the Congress and the Senate, it ain't gonna happen. That's a serious problem. It leads you to a kind of despair. Can we ever fix the system? The elites, the ruling class benefit from it is, the rest of us are suffering. How are we going to fix this problem? And nobody could really come up with a fix. Ronald Reagan in 1980 ran on a platform calling for a gold standard, and he did like all great presidents do. He kept his promise by appointing a commission, a gold commission to study the issue. That gold commission had 9 members, 5 of whom were known opponents of gold and 4 of whom were proponents of gold, and the commission voted 5-4 against the gold standard. That literally, truly happened. And that was the end of that. So, you know, like for me, who by this time had a kind of a nice career as an editor and writer in the space, thinking about money and banking a lot, I didn't see the solution. And I couldn't see the solution. And maybe you probably don't remember these days, but there were many, many efforts being made all throughout the 1990s and early 2000s to come up with some kind of money for the internet age, a money that would be private, privately produced and managed, disconnected from government, and available to everybody so that we could escape the oppression of the tyranny of the experts, essentially, who keep screwing us over again and again and again. And it was just nothing but failure, really. I remember those days. This is the problem with looking at a series of failures and thinking that the whole idea is wrong without realizing that there's specific things that cause that failure. Yeah, but there was e-gold and there was e-money, and there was DigiCash, and there was all these things, and every one of them was fell apart for various reasons, mostly having to do with the problem of double spending and reproducibility. You know, this is the problem. The thing that's beautiful about the internet is it allows for infinite reproducibility of assets. That doesn't work so well in the case of money. You have to have a scarce good, and so you had to have some way to scarcify it. And I had concluded by 2008 or so that there was no hope whatsoever for a private internet money. And of course, so by the time the white paper came out, I thought, yeah, I've seen this before. That's a racket. That's never going to work. And about a year later, I got an email from a guy whose name is Satoshi. No, I don't. No, but it was October. It was October of 2010. He goes, look, I think you should actually look really seriously at this thing called Bitcoin. And I thought, I just can't take it anymore. I've heard from you weirdos too many times. And I said, thank you very much, and deleted the email. I keep that pinned on my bulletin board now, just to to humble me. I don't know anything. I thought I knew everything, and I didn't. And it basically. Make a long story short, it took me about 3 years. And actually, is Gabe, are you here? Gabe Sukunik? I can't believe Gabe did not come to my lecture. So Gabe Sukunik and his friends, some original gangsters, all took me to lunch. And the last thing I wanted to do was go to lunch with a bunch of weird Bitcoin guys. But they were promising to pay, and they made me an owner, and and bought the bow tie off my neck with Bitcoin, and it was the most expensive bow tie imaginable in today's terms, because I think I sold one bow tie for 3 Bitcoin. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, nice, right? Good deal, good deal. Yeah, I spent them a long time ago. Bought some crimping pliers or something. I don't remember what happened. But anyway, so I didn't get rich from that stuff. But what it left me with was a realization that you can't give up hope. That things can change with enough innovation, dedication, determination, technical ability, a willingness to try and try and try again, despite the failures, learn from your failures. And that's what happened with Bitcoin. And it was the most incredible realization I had in those early months of 2013 to discover that we finally found the thing that we've been looking for. Let's play the dating game here. 100 years? Sure, 100 years. I mean, it's amazing to think. They froze money in place 100 years ago. 100 years later, it's just sucked worse than ever, right? No innovation whatsoever. By the time we got innovation, it was like, comparing a Model T from, 1910 with a Maserati, today. That's how good this money worked. And it was amazing to see what happened once we got innovation and money. It was absolutely beautiful. But forget 100 years. Really, the attempt to monopolize money by the ruling class in every society dates back 6,000 years. All of recorded history, essentially. That's the change that the advent of cryptocurrency had meant to the world. The thing that had wrecked innumerable societies, led to holocausts and genocides and gulags and totalitarianism and the wreckage of the human spirit, of the disenfranchisement of marginalized people, the robbing of the human personality of all dignity, the thing that shattered a possibility for peace and prosperity, everything that had ever ruined the world, at some level is traced back to the central management of money. And now suddenly, that has changed. That is a remarkable thing. And here's what's more remarkable than anything else. It didn't come from the Fed. It didn't come from the Treasury. It didn't come from an elite academic big shot with a New York Times column and a Nobel Prize. It came from an anonymous programmer released on a free email list. Here's my open source program. Let's play. Let's see what we can do. It's a complete transformation of the way we think about innovation and the social process of innovation. Not top down, but bottom up. It didn't surprise me at all that it led to widespread panic. I mean, the emancipation of humanity from centralized trust, money, relationships, the advent of a new technology that allows us to use decentralized system to document our ownership rights and therefore claim them for ourselves in a way that prohibits any demagogue, hegemonic dictator at any place on the planet from finally controlling us, that is amazing. So yeah, I became a crypto utopian, and I remain one today. I'll just admit that to you. I am. We're going to get there. It's going to take time, but we're going to get there. So let me say this in conclusion. I sleep a lot better than I used to. And it's because of this technology. So, when the Green New Deal is proposed, as it was last week, that promises to end air travel and rebuild every building in America and provide a living income for everybody unwilling to work and so on and so on. And the greatest bunch of nonsense I've read in my life. I think, thank God for cryptocurrency. Because you know what? You know, and by the way, I don't want to pick on just the left. I mean, you're going to get some equally insane things on the right too. You know, with proposals that imagine the world that the government can do anything with the world provided they have the ability to do it. But here's what's remarkable. All of these plans you're hearing now from Washington right now, they all rely on this theory. It's a heterodox economic theory that's actually getting ever more mainstream. It's called modern monetary theory. I wonder who in this room has heard of MMT. Okay, so yeah, we've got a few. So MMT is actually remarkable. I mean, it's like a post-scarcity economics. Basically, it's a theory that money is a public good, and until the world is a perfect place according to anybody's dreams, that is proof that there's not enough of it, so the Fed should just print as much as possible. And I mean, if an MMT theorist were here, I don't think that he or she would entirely disagree with that characterization. I mean, this is actually the view. It's the ultimate kind of John Law money crankism you've ever heard in your life. It's gaining academic credibility. So when I read these things, if this had been 20 years ago and MMT had gained academic credibility, I would have thought, holy shit, we're all doomed. Right? But nowadays, thank God, we have an option. We have an escape. We have a way out. We have a way to preserve our freedoms, our independence, our personal prosperity. I'm not saying that Bitcoin is going to usher in a utopia immediately. It's not. But for the first time, as far as I know, in 6,000 years, we've been given relatively easy access to some way to accomplish something like a personal secession from whatever harebrained, insane ideas the ruling class is going to have next. And nonetheless, despite what our rulers are trying to do to us, live a good life anyway. To me, that is a remarkable change of history. What made it possible? Dedication to ideas, dedication to principle. Let's never forget that Satoshi's White Table was motivated primarily by a desire for emancipation from the kind of machinations that the ruling class engaged in that led us to the financial crisis of 2008. And I can promise you, if you think that that's the end of it, it is not the end of it. Everything has gotten worse since those days. The fix after 2008, it was just a matter of kicking the can down the road. So the time will come. The time will come. Now, at least we have an option. I sleep better. I hope you do too. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for being part of building a beautiful future.